You're standing in a city that no longer knows what to believe. Nuremberg, winter of 1945. Snow drifts down over the skeleton of an empire, white dust on blackened stone. The air carries a faint metallic scent of ash and wet plaster. Nothing moves except the wind through empty windows. If these quiet journeys through history speak to you, take a moment to subscribe, not out of habit, but to keep these untold stories alive. And before we drift deeper, tell us where you're listening from, or which image lingers with you the most. Now, let us move on. Let the past unfold at its own pace. You're listening to Echoes of War. Chapter 1. Silence After the Storm. The grand parade grounds where banners once rippled in perfect rhythm are now a cratered plain. The marble tribunes gape open, hollow, their inscriptions blown away. A woman bends to pick through rubble, her scarf pulled tight against the cold. A boy, his face hidden beneath a cap, drags a broken toy cart through the snow. Their footsteps are the only sound. Everywhere, the Reich's monuments have become tombstones. The Zeppelin field lies silent except for the creak of fallen girders. In the distance, a bell tolls, but no congregation answers. The echo wanders through ruined streets and dies against walls scorched black by war. You follow the bell's direction until you reach a building that still stands, the Palace of Justice. Its facade is cracked, its windows boarded, yet light glows behind the glass. Inside, carpenters hammer, translators test microphones, soldiers check passes. Sawdust covers the marble floor. It smells of pine and fresh paint, the scent of something about to begin. 4 months, Allied engineers have worked to restore this one surviving complex. It will host an event the world has never witnessed, a trial not of nations but of men, accused of crimes so vast they bend the meaning of law itself. They call it the International Military Tribunal. But for now it's just noise and preparation. Wires snake across the floor. Typewriters clack. In the corridor, a British officer complains that the heat won't work. A Soviet guard stands wordless at the door, his breath fogging in the cold. Downstairs, in a row of converted cells, 21 prisoners wait. They were once ministers, generals, architects of conquest. Now they wear identical grey suits and numbers on their sleeves. Their boots are polished, their hair cut short, their eyes carefully blank. Only their hands betray them, trembling, tapping, gripping. Hermann Goering paces like a caged bear, joking loudly to anyone who will listen. Rudolf Hess stares at the wall, murmuring half-sentences no one understands. Albert Speer writes notes, neat and orderly, as if design could still impose meaning on chaos. Each man rehearses his defense: obedience, ignorance, patriotism, necessity. Above them, the courtroom takes shape. The carpenters build a ring of desks for the judges: British, American, Soviet, French. Behind them, translators will sit in glass boxes so that every word echoes in 4 languages at once. The architecture of justice, transparent yet fragile. On the bench at the front of the room, a young American lawyer rehearses his opening lines under his breath. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored. His voice quivers at first, then steadies. He reads it again, louder this time, to the empty chamber. The words hang in the air like a promise, or a warning. Outside, Nuremberg settles into night. The snow thickens. The fires in the stoves flicker low. Somewhere, a soldier plays a harmonica, slow, uncertain notes that fade into the wind. From the sky, flakes fall on roofs, on ruins, on the stone eagles shattered by bombs. Tomorrow, The world will gather here. Cameras will whir, pens will scratch, translators will whisper. And in this hollowed-out city, where truth was once a weapon, the Allies will try to measure justice. The war is over, yet its ghosts are not gone. They linger in the corridors, in the papers, in the silence between questions. The snow keeps falling, covering the ruins like a confession no one asked for, but everyone can read. Every morning, an old man named Wilhelm sweeps the steps of the courthouse. He is not employed to do so. No one pays him. He simply comes, each day at dawn. His son died in the war, buried somewhere near Kursk. Sweeping, he says, keeps the ghosts away. He has watched soldiers from 4 nations walk through those doors, Americans with brisk steps, Russians silent and alert, the British tidy and patient, the French smoking as they speak. To him, they are not victors, only visitors in a city that has already lost everything. Sometimes he pauses and looks at the emblem carved above the entrance, the scales of justice scorched by fire. He mutters, "You survived too," and keeps sweeping. For him, the trial is not about guilt or innocence, but about noise returning. The sound of boots, voices, arguments. It means the world is moving again. One evening, as the sun sets, he notices light glowing through the broken courthouse windows. For the first time since the war ended, the building looks alive. He smiles faintly. Tomorrow, he thinks, the silence will finally have to defend itself. Chapter 2. The City of Judgment. Morning comes grey and slow. Smoke rises from stoves fed with scavenged wood. Soldiers stomp their boots outside the Palace of Justice, shaking snow from their coats. Somewhere, a dog barks, startled by the clang of metal shutters. Inside the courthouse, the lights flicker awake. Nuremberg is being reborn as a courtroom. Engineers have strung telephone cables across the bomb streets, patching them through generators salvaged from army trucks. In the main hall, a great tangle of microphones, cameras, and translation wires coils across the floor like veins beneath skin. The building hums faintly with power. To the people of the city, it is an alien spectacle. The same foreign uniforms that occupied their homes now preside over something mysterious called justice. Rumor spreads in the breadlines. Some say the generals will hang before the snow melts, others that the Americans only stage this for cameras. The baker on further Strasse shrugs. They judge our masters. Perhaps next they'll judge us. The Allies, too, are uneasy partners. They share little beyond exhaustion. The Americans bring law books and typewriters, the British their stoicism, the French a sense of ceremony, the Soviets suspicion and soldiers. They agree on the crimes, but not always on the meaning. What is aggression? What is obedience? Who decides where duty ends and murder begins? At lunch, in the officers' mess, translators argue softly about the German word befell, order. Can it excuse? Can it condemn? A single verb carries the weight of 20 million dead. In the city outside, life struggles forward. Children drag sleds through rubble, hunting for coal. Old women trade potato peels for bread crusts. The black market flourishes in the shadow of the courthouse. Soap for cigarettes, warmth for silence. Each evening, searchlights sweep across the sky, not for bombers now, but to illuminate the work of repair. Reporters arrive from every corner of the world. They crowd the press benches, pencils sharpened, notebooks ready. The first dispatches speak of the greatest trial in history. The newspapers print photographs of the ruins beside portraits of the accused, as if trying to match faces to destruction. One journalist writes, "Nuremberg stands like a wound that refuses to close." Another, "The The city that once gave laws to tyranny now lends its name to judgment. For many of the soldiers guarding the tribunal, the contrast is dizzying. Just months earlier, they had fought through these same streets, firing into windows, lobbing grenades into cellars. Now they check passes, escort witnesses, salute judges in robes instead of generals in medals. In the evenings, they drink together in makeshift taverns, sharing bad coffee and worse schnapps. They speak of home, of wives and fields and peace. One British corporal says quietly, "We used to fight ghosts. Now we must listen to them." Inside the courtroom, the walls are lined with flags: British, American, Soviet, French. 4 ideals of victory, 4 versions of truth. Above them, a single light burns all night, so the guards below never forget that the eyes of the world are upon them. At the center sits the dock, 21 chairs bolted to the floor, each with its own microphone. Behind the defendants stands a row of guards in white helmets, rifles slung, faces blank. The photographers love the symmetry. It looks like order reborn. When the first day of proceedings begins, people crowd the streets outside. Some come out of curiosity, others in disbelief. A woman from Dresden weeps when she hears the names called aloud. She had lost her husband in the firestorm, her son on the Eastern Front. She whispers, "Who judges the victors?" No one answers. Inside, the gavel falls, and the translation headsets click to life. The voices of 4 nations overlap: English, Russian, French, German, each speaking justice in its own accent. The trial of the century has begun. For those in the gallery, it feels less like a courtroom and more like a reckoning with the century itself. The words echo off marble and plaster, heavy as stone. Truth, for so long twisted and shouted, must now be spoken softly, line by line, until the world learns how to listen again. 4 flags, 1 language. The interpreters sit behind their glass walls like underwater creatures, each surrounded by a tangle of wires and switches. They are the lungs of this new justice, the unseen machinery that turns chaos into comprehension. One of them, a Polish woman named Helena, keeps a diary. She writes not of guilt or law, but of exhaustion. "Words are the most dangerous survivors of war," she notes. "Every time I translate mass deportation, I taste metal in my mouth." She has learned to speak without thinking, to hear without listening. Sometimes, when the judges recess, she takes off her headset and realizes her own voice has started echoing in her head, as though someone else was speaking through her. The man beside her, a young American named John, once studied literature. Now he interprets the testimonies of those who burned libraries. He jokes, half-heartedly, that Babel was rebuilt here, this time with microphones. Each night, the interpreters leave their booths and walk home through the ruined streets. They speak to no one. Their heads are filled with 4 languages at once, each carrying the weight of a different truth. When Helena passes the courthouse gate, she always glances up at the 4 flags and wonders if language can really make nations understand one another, or only translate their distance. Chapter 3. Gathering the Evidence. The war has ended, but the search for its truth has only begun. Across the ruins of Europe, men and women sift through ashes for paper. Armies once hunted enemies, now they hunt documents, orders, lists, signatures that tie words to actions. Whole warehouses fill with files marked Geheim, secret, yet all their secrets lie naked in the light. Every railway schedule, every requisition slip, every coded telegram becomes a piece of testimony. What was once bureaucracy is now evidence. In the age of total war, even murder came with a stamp and a date. Teams of investigators, the document hunters, follow the retreating army's paths. In castle basements they find trunks of photographs. In factory offices, carbon copies of deportation quotas. They load them onto trucks and drive them to Nuremberg, where clerks labor day and night to translate, classify, and number them. Somewhere between the ledgers and the human cost, the story begins to take shape. The Allies build a fortress of paper. It rises higher every day. Binders of decrees, confessions, meeting minutes. Clerks wear gloves so the acid of old ink won't stain their hands. The scent of mold and dust fills the air. They call it the paper war. For the lawyers, it is overwhelming. How do you make sense of 6 million deaths in paragraphs and clauses? How do you build a moral argument from fragments of burned pages? Yet they persist, line by line, word by word, until atrocity acquires the structure of a case. Colonel Telford Taylor, one of the Americans, writes in his diary, "Each document is a ghost. They come to us without voices, yet they demand to be heard." In the countryside beyond Nuremberg, soldiers discover film reels left by the propaganda ministry. When they screen them, the images flicker across cracked walls. Goebbels smiling, parades unfolding in impossible precision, the Führer saluting beneath summer skies. Then the reels turn darker. Camps, starvation, pits of bodies. The projector whirs on, indifferent. The watchers sit frozen, unable to blink. Some of these reels will be shown in the courtroom. The prosecutors debate whether the world is ready to see them. The evidence must speak, one says, even if it screams. Witnesses arrive by train, soldiers, secretaries, survivors. They carry their stories like scars. Many speak in monotone, as if distance could protect them. Some collapse mid-sentence, others stare straight ahead, describing the indescribable with clinical calm. The translators wipe their eyes. The typists hesitate before striking each key. A young stenographer from Manchester writes to her mother, "We are trying to put pain into words, and the typewriter does not know how." The court's archives expand until they fill entire corridors. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, marked with initials and dates. The Germans are efficient even in guilt. They kept records of everything. Somewhere among them lies the line between obedience and intent, between policy and crime. In the evenings, the lawyers walk through the ruins to clear their minds. The city glows faintly in the snow. They pass the skeletal remains of the cathedral, its spire sheared in half, its bells silent. A faint sound of piano drifts from a nearby house, someone practicing scales on missing keys. One of the British prosecutors stops to listen. He says quietly, "We are rebuilding civilization from paperwork and memory." And perhaps that is what Nuremberg has become, a place where memory is translated into evidence, and evidence into a kind of truth. A city where silence is no longer the final word. The paper war. In a drafty office 2 floors below the courtroom, a group of women sorts photographs. They are translators, clerks, secretaries, most under 30, most widowed. They sit in silence, labeling images of corpses, ruins, and camps. Anna, the youngest, has developed a method. She looks at each picture only once. She writes the number, files it, and never looks again. The older women call it survival. A U.S. Army photographer enters with a new box of negatives. "Straight from Dachau," he mutters, setting them down. The women freeze for a moment, then continue their quiet rhythm of rubber stamps and pencil marks. Across the room, a French archivist leans over a pile of telegrams. He murmurs in disbelief. They documented everything. A German typist beside him replies softly, "That's what we were trained to do." The walls of the office are covered in paper now. layers of evidence rising like new wallpaper over the past. Every line, every date, every name is a fragment of a mosaic that no one wants to see completed. Late at night, when the lights flicker, Anna closes her ledger and whispers a prayer, not for the dead, but for the words she's written. She fears that one day, someone will read them and feel nothing. Chapter 4. The Defendants. They sit together in a long wooden dock, 21 men bound by fate and by failure. The faces that once filled newspapers, the voices that once commanded armies, are now pale under the courtroom lights. They shift in their chairs, cough quietly, glance toward the cameras, and try not to meet one another's eyes. Each morning, guards march them in 2 by 2. The white helmets of the Americans gleam against the gray suits of the accused. The defendants bow slightly, more habit than respect, and take their places behind the microphones bolted to the table. The room smells of damp wool, tobacco, and old paper. The translators in their glass booths adjust headsets. A low hum fills the air, the sound of civilization forcing itself to listen. Hermann Goering sits at the far end, broad-shouldered, confident, the only one who seems to enjoy the attention. He leans toward the others, whispers jokes, keeps notes in a blue notebook embossed with his initials. He still believes himself a statesman. When photographers enter, he straightens, tilts his chin, smiles slightly, as if posing for a victory portrait rather than a trial. Next to him, Rudolf Hess stares into the distance, his expression vacant. He claims not to remember his past, not even his flight to Scotland or his years beside the Führer. The doctors debate whether his amnesia is real or convenient. Either way, it makes him seem spectral, half-present. Joachim von Ribbentrop, the former foreign minister, looks perpetually astonished, as if diplomacy itself had betrayed him. Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Wehrmacht, sits rigid, his posture military even in disgrace. When the indictments are read, crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, he grips the table until his knuckles whiten. Albert Speer, the architect, appears calm, meticulous. He writes constantly, sketching notes, dates, reflections. Some guards think he is different, more thoughtful. Others say he is merely rehearsing a new design, the construction of innocence. At the back of the dock sits a man named Fritz Sorkel, responsible for the forced labor program that dragged millions across Europe into German factories. When his name is read aloud, he shakes his head and mutters, "I only followed orders." The phrase echoes around the hall, and for a moment everyone stares at him, because they know they will hear it again and again. The judges observe silently. They have been warned not to show emotion. Behind them, the flags of the 4 Allied powers hang heavy in the still air. The symbolism is deliberate. Justice as unity, unity as redemption. Yet beneath the surface, old rivalries remain. The Soviets want swift punishment, the Americans a precedent, the British restraint, the French acknowledgement. Justice, like war, has its coalitions. The prosecutors call the first witnesses. Soldiers, diplomats, factory managers. The translators repeat every word 4 times, English, German, Russian, French, until the truth itself seems exhausted. The defendants listen, heads bowed or eyes closed, while evidence piles up like snowdrifts. Goering still tries to dominate. He interrupts, demands to speak, corrects translations. The judges warn him, but he smiles, unrepentant. He knows the cameras are watching. For him, even this is theatre. Hess remains silent. Speer watches everything, calculating. Keitel weeps openly when confronted with documents bearing his own signature. Some of the younger guards avert their eyes. Faces behind the glass. In the observation booth above the courtroom, Corporal Daniel Morris keeps the daily log. He's 24, a farm kid from Ohio who joined the army before he'd ever seen the ocean. Now he spends his days watching the architects of catastrophe through bulletproof glass. He doesn't hate them. He expected to, but when he looks down, all he sees are tired men pretending not to be afraid. They remind him of prisoners at a county fair, waiting for judgment from people who already made up their minds. Each afternoon, he notes their routines. Goering's smirk at the journalists, Hess's blank stare, Ribbentrop's trembling hands. He's fascinated by Speer, how he listens intently, as though still in a meeting designing the next version of the world. Sometimes Daniel wonders if evil has a face, or if it just borrows whatever expression is available. During lunch breaks, he eats with the guards. One of them, a British sergeant, tells him, "The funny thing is, they queue. Every one of them lines up politely for soup." That night, Daniel writes home to his sister. "They don't look like monsters. That's the scariest part." He folds the letter carefully, sealing it with a tremor in his hand. From where he sits, justice looks less like fire and more like endurance, an endless staring contest between guilt and humanity. At night, in their cells, the men receive simple meals: soup, bread, coffee substitute. They read newspapers under guard. The walls are thin, and from the hallway come the sounds of pacing, coughing, sometimes muffled prayers. A chaplain visits each evening. Some listen, some refuse. Goering dictates his memoirs to a guard, describing himself as a misunderstood patriot. Speer writes about guilt in careful, detached language. Keitel dreams aloud, shouting commands in his sleep. The Americans note everything, every word, every gesture. The Nuremberg prison becomes a laboratory of conscience. In the courtroom, the tension builds. The defendants are no longer men but symbols, of a nation, of obedience, of the abyss that follows ideology. The reporters capture their faces in sketches and photographs. A cartoon in a London paper shows 21 empty chairs labelled Germany. The caption reads, "The dock." The public grows fascinated. People crowd the courthouse steps, hoping for a glimpse of the monsters. Yet when they see them, tired, grey, ordinary, they are disappointed. Evil, it turns out, looks human after all. One afternoon, a power outage plunges the courtroom into darkness. For a moment, the only sound is breathing. Then a guard's flashlight flicks on, cutting across the faces in the dock. The beam catches Goering's smile, Speer's pen, Hess's blank stare. It is an accidental tableau, the empire reduced to shadows. When the lights return, the proceedings continue as if nothing happened. But the image lingers in everyone's mind, the architects of war illuminated not by glory, but by the small, trembling light of a torch. Chapter 5: Voices of the Dead. The witnesses arrive in waves. They come from every corner of the broken continent, each carrying a story carved into memory. They are soldiers and survivors, doctors and secretaries, men and women who have seen what language cannot hold. Their words will try to make the invisible visible. The prosecutors call them one by one. Some walk with canes, others are led by the arm. Their shoes squeak on the polished floor, echoing through the chamber. The defendants watch as they take the stand, some with curiosity, others with hollow expressions of fatigue. The first witness speaks in German, his voice shaking. He was a railway clerk in Poland. He describes trains, numbers, schedules, freight weights. He never saw the passengers, only the orders. When the prosecutor asks what he learned later, the man falls silent. He looks at his hands and whispers, "Everything I sent away never came back." The translator's microphones buzz faintly as they repeat the words into 4 languages. Every accent of Europe seems to tremble. Next, a doctor from Krakow testifies. He recounts treating prisoners used in medical experiments. He explains the injections, the fevers, the dying. The judges sit motionless. One of them removes his glasses and wipes them slowly. Then comes a woman from France. She survived Ravensbrück. Her hair is grey, though she cannot be more than 30. She stands very straight, her hands clasped tightly before her. She describes the roll calls in snow, the smell of burning cloth, the way time stopped meaning anything. When she finishes, the courtroom is silent except for the sound of the typewriters. For the journalists, it becomes unbearable. They stop writing. Some leave the room, faces pale. The photographers lower their cameras. Even the guards, men who have seen battlefields, stare at the floor. The prosecutors show photographs, piles of bodies, skeletal survivors, bulldozers pushing earth over the dead. The images flicker on a screen. The room darkens. When the projector stops, no one breathes. A correspondent from Le Monde writes that night, "The tribunal sits in judgment not only of men, but of imagination itself. We cannot believe, yet we must." The defendants react differently. Goering smirks, then looks away. Ribbentrop bites his lip until it bleeds. Keitel hides his face in his hands. Hess stares forward, expressionless, as if none of it concerns him. Only Speer looks downward, his pen motionless, as though a blueprint he once admired has just collapsed. A survivor from the Netherlands tells of her sister's last letter, thrown from a train window and found weeks later in a ditch. The judges let her read it aloud. The words are smudged, the paper brittle. When she finishes, she folds it carefully and places it on the stand. "I want it to be part of the record," she says. It will be. Days blur into one another. More witnesses, more documents, more horrors recited in measured tones. The translators begin to falter, voices cracking under repetition. Even the lawyers grow quiet. Their questions become fewer, shorter. The truth no longer needs prompting. It walks into the room and sits beside everyone. In the evenings, the witnesses return to the train station, escorted by soldiers. Some weep, others simply stare at the snow outside. One woman touches the frost on the window and whispers, "I did not think I would live to speak." The tribunal becomes a chorus of ghosts. Each story overlaps with another until the courtroom itself feels haunted. Yet there is also something new here, an insistence that silence will no longer protect anyone. A British judge writes in his notebook, "The law listens slowly, but it listens." And in that slowness lies the first fragile shape of justice. Justice not as vengeance, but as remembrance, carved word by word into the memory of the world. The weight of listening. The journalists gather at a nearby café each night after court. The tables are crowded with notebooks, cameras, and untouched cups of coffee gone cold. They speak softly, as if afraid their words might break something. One reporter from Sweden writes in his diary, "History has turned into a voice, and it will not stop speaking. I have no choice but to listen." A young Soviet stenographer, exhausted, rubs her temples. She has written every testimony by hand, her fingers blistered from the pressure of the pen. She tells her British colleague, "It's strange, the worst stories are the easiest to write. They carry their own momentum." A translator, pale and shaking, excuses himself. He steps outside, vomits into the snow, then returns to his seat. No one says a word. They all know the routine. Later that night, one of the American correspondents walks alone past the courthouse. The windows are dark now, but he can still feel the day echoing inside the walls. He thinks of the witnesses, how each word they spoke seemed to lift a small piece of the world back toward light. He lights a cigarette, watches the smoke rise, and says quietly to himself, "We heard them. That has to matter." Chapter 6. Cross-examination of evil. You're sitting in the gallery, just above the defendant's box. From this height, you can see every flicker of expression, the tilt of a head, the tightening of a jaw, as the prosecutors begin their assault. The microphones hum, translation headsets click. What follows is not noise, but history being forced to speak. Colonel Robert Story of the United States stands first. He does not shout. He reads, calmly, precisely, from letters, memos, and orders signed by the very men before him. Each sentence lands like a hammer on glass. For the first time, the machinery of genocide has a paper trail. Behind the glass booth, the interpreters move their lips in perfect rhythm, turning horror into 4 languages at once. Their voices overlap like broken prayer. The defendants shift uneasily. Goering still tries to command the stage. He interrupts, smirks, toys with the microphones. But the world has learned to answer him with silence. When the evidence films are played, footage of camps liberated only months before, his eyes drop, just once, to the table. Even he cannot out-talk the camera. Rudolf Hess sits motionless, pretending not to remember. Joachim von Ribbentrop sweats through his collar, muttering to his lawyer. Albert Speer takes notes, methodical, polite, already shaping the narrative that he was merely an architect, not an architect of death. The gallery can hardly breathe. A woman from Warsaw sobs quietly into her gloves. A correspondent from Life magazine stops writing, his pencil trembling. When the projector stops, the silence is unbearable. Someone whispers, "Now they cannot deny it." The judges call a recess, but no one moves. The light has changed. Even the dust seems to hang heavier in the air. Justice, it seems, has a weight of its own. In the evening, the defendants return to their cells. Some pace, others stare at the ceiling. The guards exchange uneasy glances, watching men who once commanded millions now confined to 9 square meters. Above them, the courthouse glows faintly against the winter fog, like a lantern held over the abyss. Tomorrow, more witnesses will come. A Dutch survivor of Dachau, a British officer who followed the paper trail from Berlin to the crematoria. Each story will tighten the net a little more, until the defense has nowhere left to stand. But tonight, Nuremberg is quiet again. Somewhere beyond the rubble, a train passes, its whistle long and mournful, as if the city itself were exhaling the last breath of the Reich. Night in the cells. The prison warden, Captain Burton Andrus, keeps a log every night. It's part of procedure, but for him, it has become a confession. He writes not what happens, but what he feels. 2200 hours. Goering restless. Tried to talk to guards. 2240. Speer reading again. 23:15. Hess silent as stone. Sometimes, Andrus walks the corridor without his clipboard, just listening. He can tell who is awake by the sound of breathing. Ribbentrop mumbles prayers in his sleep. Keitel whispers orders, to no one. One night, he pauses outside Speer's cell. The light is still on. Speer is writing, slow and steady, like a man building something delicate. When Andrus asks what it is, Speer says, "A list of things I could have said no to." Later, as Andrus returns to his desk, he looks at the pages on which he's written their names, their habits, their diets. It feels like a mirror of the evidence upstairs, numbers and records again, only smaller. He wonders if this, too, will one day end up in a box labeled history. That night, he dreams of the sound of the typewriter echoing through empty halls. It is the same rhythm he hears when the guards lock the cells, a metallic punctuation, marking the slow sentence of guilt. Chapter 7. Justice or Victor's Revenge. Outside, Nuremberg begins to thaw. Snowmelt runs through the gutters, washing the soot from cobblestones, uncovering bits of glass and bone. The war feels both near and impossibly distant. In the Palace of Justice, spring brings no warmth, only new questions. The trial has moved past evidence and into argument. The prosecution has built its mountain of proof. Now the defense tries to chip away at it, pebble by pebble. The rhythm of the courtroom changes. The voice of accusation gives way to the voice of justification. The defense lawyers are German, chosen carefully to ensure the appearance of fairness. Most are men who once served the same system, now under judgment. They bow to the judges, speak softly, quote law with reverence. They know they cannot win, only explain. Their clients whisper constantly, dictating strategy. Goering takes control of his defense like a general on the last battlefield. He insists on wearing a uniform, denied. He demands that the charges of crimes against humanity be struck for vagueness, denied again. Still, he argues brilliantly, twisting logic into knots, turning the courtroom into his final stage. His lawyer, Otto Stamer, argues that Germany's leaders only obeyed the laws of their own state. A man cannot be guilty, he says, for serving his country. The words echo through the hall, heavy with the same obedience that once built the empire. A murmur rises in the gallery. One of the prosecutors leans forward and whispers to a colleague, "That was the problem, wasn't it? Everyone served." Albert Speer takes the stand in his own defense. He looks calm, composed, almost professorial. He admits guilt, not of specific crimes, but of moral blindness. "I did not see because I did not want to see," he says quietly. His confession is partial, but in the sea of denial, it sounds like redemption. Some reporters even call him the good Nazi. Others note that admitting guilt without consequence is another kind of performance. Rudolf Hess refuses to speak at all. He sits with his eyes closed, as if the trial were happening in another world. When the judges press him, he says, "I am alive by God's will, and he will judge me." The courtroom rustles. Even the interpreters pause. A moment later, the proceedings resume as if nothing divine had interrupted. The Soviet prosecutors grow restless. They dislike the endless arguments, the legalistic dances. For them, guilt is obvious. "Why must we prove what the world already knows?" one of them asks during a recess. "Do not these men's faces prove it?" The Americans insist that the law must speak, not vengeance. "If we hang them without process," one officer says, "we make them martyrs. If we try them, we make them examples." The French argue for clarity of principle, the British for restraint. Justice becomes a negotiation among victors. Even in unity, ideology seeps through the cracks. Outside, ordinary Germans read the headlines and wonder aloud, are these trials justice or theatre? Are they learning from history, or simply writing the victor's version? Some shake their heads and say, "The Allies bombed our cities. Who will try them?" Others whisper that perhaps, finally, they are seeing what their silence allowed. In the canteen one night, a young American guard speaks with a German translator. He says he feels sorry for some of the prisoners. The translator looks at him, tired, and says, "You mustn't feel sorry for them. You must feel sorry for us, for the people who listened." As the days stretch on, the question of justice grows heavier than any verdict. Can law rebuild morality? Can punishment cleanse memory? The tribunal proceeds anyway, day by day, through the tangle of legal codes and human grief. Each evening, as the judges retire, the city darkens. The courthouse lights remain, the last candles of an empire's reckoning, and though the air outside smells of thawing earth, the chill of conscience lingers. Justice debated. That night, the prosecutors gather at the Grand Hotel, their usual refuge from the cold logic of the courtroom. Empty coffee cups and cigarette smoke fill the room as the four teams argue in low voices. They are allies by law, competitors by instinct. Justice Robert Jackson sits with his British counterpart, Sir Geoffrey Lawrence. Jackson, the American, leans forward, exhaustion visible in his eyes. "I keep thinking," he says, "we've built a moral monument out of rubble, but what if we've only rearranged the stones?" Lawrence stirs his tea, considering. "Perhaps justice isn't purity," he replies. "Perhaps it's persistence. The courage to keep defining it when everything else falls apart." At another table, the Soviet delegation smokes in silence. One of them mutters, "If justice must be agreed upon, it is already lost." A French jurist answers softly, "No, if it must be agreed upon, it has begun." The conversation drifts from law to faith, from punishment to forgiveness. They all know tomorrow they will stand side by side again, pretending unity before the world. But here, over ashtrays and late-night coffee, they are simply men wrestling with the ghosts of words like truth and fairness. As they leave, Jackson lingers by the window. Outside, the snow has melted, revealing dark mud and the broken outline of streets. He writes in his notebook, "Justice may be imperfect, but it is the only victory worth having." He closes it, lights one more cigarette, and walks back toward the courthouse, where the lights burn all night. Chapter 8. The Sentences. The trial has lasted nearly a year. The seasons have changed over Nuremberg, snow to rain, rain to dust, and now back to chill autumn wind. Inside the Palace of Justice, the same faces sit in the same seats, but something has shifted. Even the guards move differently, as if aware that the world is holding its breath. Tomorrow, the verdicts will be read. The courtroom feels smaller now. The benches creak when journalists lean forward, their pencils sharpened, ready to record history's punctuation marks, life, death, or years in between. The defendants have grown pale and thinner. Their suits hang loose, their hair cropped close. They whisper, but not as much as before. The end has made them quiet. A German clerk mops the floor before the judges enter. He moves slowly, deliberately, careful not to disturb the symmetry of the room. On the bench, the flags of the four Allied nations hang heavy and still, colors muted by dust. For a moment, the chamber looks less like a court and more like a mausoleum. When the judges appear, everyone rises. The translation headsets crackle. The microphones hum softly. The chief judge begins reading in measured tones, each word echoed fourfold through the translator's booths. The air vibrates with repetition, as though language itself is struggling to bear the weight of judgment. Hermann Goering, guilty on all counts. Goering's expression does not change. He nods slightly, as if acknowledging applause from an invisible audience. He had expected this. He will not give them the satisfaction of fear. Rudolf Hess, guilty on 2 counts, acquitted on others, sentenced to life imprisonment. Hess blinks slowly, murmurs something about destiny. No one can tell whether he understands. Joachim von Ribbentrop, guilty on all counts. He stiffens, lips moving silently, perhaps still rehearsing arguments that never convinced anyone. Wilhelm Keitel, guilty on all counts. The old soldier stands briefly, salutes, and sits down again. His hands tremble. Albert Speer, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, sentenced to 20 years. There is a stir among the reporters. Some had predicted the gallows for him. Speer bows his head, eyes closed, as though already imagining how to describe this moment in his memoirs. One by one, the names and sentences follow. 12 condemned to die, 7 to prison, 3 acquitted. The words are cold, procedural, yet they ripple through the chamber like shock waves. When the reading ends, the silence is so deep that even the rustle of paper sounds sacrilegious. Outside, crowds gather around radio sets in cafes and ruined squares. The verdicts crackle through static in 4 languages. Some cheer, others shake their heads. A man in uniform mutters, "The victors judge the vanquished." That is not justice. A woman beside him replies, "Maybe not. But it is the first time anyone judged at all." The condemned are moved to separate cells. Guards check them every hour. Goering remains talkative, boasting that he will choose his own death. He is right. The night before the hangings, he bites into a cyanide capsule hidden in his effects. When they find him, he looks almost peaceful, one last act of control in a life defined by it. At dawn, the rest are led to the gallows. The chaplain walks with them, reading softly from the Psalms. Keitel whispers "Alles für Deutschland" before the trapdoor falls. Ribbentrop asks for forgiveness. Some die instantly, others not. The hangman's work is clinical, merciless. When it is done, the bodies are taken away, cremated, and their ashes scattered in the Isar River. No graves, no monuments, only absence. The sentences mark an ending, but not closure. The press calls it justice without joy. The people of Nuremberg return to their ruined homes, uncertain what any of it means for them. The Palace of Justice remains lit for 3 nights, its windows glowing like candles against the dark. One American journalist writes, "The gallows are empty now, but the questions they raised will outlive us all." He is right. The world has witnessed justice, and it has also glimpsed its limits. Law has spoken, but morality, perhaps, will never finish speaking. The empty dock. After the executions, a janitor named Franz is assigned to clean the courtroom. It is a task no one else wants. He moves slowly, sweeping the sawdust from beneath the benches, wiping fingerprints from the railings. He finds a single pencil left behind on the defendant's table. It has been sharpened too many times, the wood nearly gone. He pockets it without knowing why. The seats are empty now, but Franz swears the air still remembers. When he walks across the floor, the echoes of footsteps seem to follow him. He looks up at the judge's bench, 4 flags still hanging, motionless. He wonders whether justice ends when a sentence is read, or if it continues in the silence that follows. That night, he stops by the Isar River where the ashes were scattered. The water glitters faintly under the moon. He tosses the pencil in, watching it drift. In his mind, He hears the translator's voice repeating the verdicts again and again, in 4 languages, fading into one word: guilty. For words, all meaning the same thing. 4 languages, all struggling to express the cost of remembering. Chapter 9. Aftermath. Echoes in Law and Memory. The courthouse is quiet again. The benches have been cleared, the microphones packed away, the translators gone home. Dust gathers where the judges once sat. Only the echo remains, the faint memory of voices layered across languages, a chorus that tried to turn chaos into clarity. Outside, Nuremberg looks almost ordinary. Streetcars run again, vendors sell apples in the market square, and children play among the ruins they no longer fear. The same stones that once framed banners of tyranny now hold washing lines and flower pots. But the air remembers. It carries whispers of what was said here, and what could never be said enough. The trials have ended, but their reverberations have only begun. In Geneva, in New York, in The Hague, diplomats draft new covenants using words first spoken in this room: genocide, crimes against humanity, aggression. Each word a scar turned into a warning. Legal scholars argue that Nuremberg changed the world. Soldiers argue that it only changed the rules. Some call it a triumph of law. Others, a veneer of morality over revenge. Yet for all the cynicism, the principle has been planted, that power is not above conscience, that obedience is not an excuse. It is a fragile seed, but it will grow. In Germany, people try to rebuild not just cities but selves. Former soldiers return to work in offices, teachers reopen classrooms, pastors speak of forgiveness. Few mention guilt. The word sits too heavily in the throat. Many families hide their stories, burn old uniforms, lock photographs away in attics. The silence of a nation becomes its second language. But not everyone forgets. In 1947, a group of young law students visits Nuremberg. They walk through the empty courtroom, their footsteps echoing where the defendants once sat. One of them, a future judge, writes in his notebook, "The law is not a monument. It is a mirror." Elsewhere, the legacy grows in unexpected ways. In Tokyo, another tribunal begins. In smaller cities, new courts take up the same challenge, to measure horror with the scales of reason. Some trials collapse under politics. Others, like Nuremberg, endure in memory more than in precedent. Decades later, new generations will replay these images. Grainy film, trembling testimonies, the quiet resolve of men and women translating pain into evidence. Each viewing renews the question that has never gone away: can justice ever truly balance the weight of the dead? In the early 1950s, the Palace of Justice returns to ordinary use. Civil cases, property disputes, traffic violations. The Grand Chamber where history was weighed now hears arguments over rent and inheritance. Sometimes, when the sun hits the windows just right, dust glitters in the air like ghosts. Tourists come to visit. A guide explains that this is where humanity put itself on trial. The visitors nod, take photographs, and leave quietly. The benches remain, polished smooth by time. Every November, a small memorial service is held outside the building. There are no speeches of triumph, only silence. Survivors, soldiers, students stand together and listen to the church bells. They toll not for victory, but for vigilance. You stand once more in the same courtyard where it all began. The snow returns, soft and unhurried. It covers the cracks in the stone, the scars in the walls, the faint outlines of boot prints long faded. For a moment, it feels as if the city itself is breathing easier. Nuremberg is quiet now, but beneath its quietness lies an echo, a reminder that truth, once spoken aloud, never truly dies. And though the voices of the trial have long since faded, their questions remain, circling the world like a cold wind. What is justice without memory? What is memory without courage? And who will speak when the silence returns? The world watches. In the months that follow, the radio broadcasts ripple outward. In London, a baker listens before dawn, the hum of his ovens rising under the judge's voice. In Warsaw, a teacher sits by a broken window, weeping quietly into her hands. In New York, a group of students debate whether law can ever keep pace with power. In Moscow, soldiers nod in approval, yet say nothing aloud. Each listener hears something different: vindication, grief, guilt, or relief. But all understand that something irreversible has happened. A precedent has been set, that there exists a law older than any nation, a justice higher than any flag. Years later, when the next wars come, diplomats will quote Nuremberg. Activists will invoke its name. Judges in faraway lands will say that the world learned something here, even if it keeps forgetting. And in that forgetting, the echo grows louder. Somewhere, a child asks their mother why the courthouse has so many windows. "To let in the light," she answers. And outside, snow begins to fall again, quiet and endless, like history exhaling. Epilogue. What we have learned. You stand again in the empty courtroom. The lamps are cold now, the benches bare. Outside, the city hums with ordinary life, the kind of life people once believed would never return. And yet, beneath that fragile normalcy, something endures. A memory, a question, a quiet demand. The trials were never only about punishment. They were about remembering what obedience without thought can do, what silence can allow. They were a mirror held up to mankind, forcing us to look not at monsters, but at ourselves. Because the truth of Nuremberg is this: evil rarely shouts. It signs papers, stamps documents, follows orders. It smiles politely in meetings and calls cruelty policy. And for that, it needed not demons, only people who stopped asking why. We learned that justice is slow, imperfect, often weary. But it is still the only language that can answer tyranny. We learned that truth can survive even when buried under rubble, if someone, somewhere, insists on digging it up. And we learned that laws, once written in blood, must be rewritten in empathy, again and again. The world would go on to forget, then remember, then forget again. Wars would return under new names. Borders would shift, leaders would rise, crowds would cheer. But every time a court raises its gavel in defense of humanity, the echo of Nuremberg sounds faintly beneath it. You stand in the stillness and listen. The silence feels different now, not the silence of guilt, but of understanding, because the lesson was never meant for the condemned alone. It was meant for us, the inheritors of their mistakes and the guardians of their warnings. Somewhere, a typewriter rests behind glass. Its keys are still, but if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it again, writing the same question the world must keep asking. What will we do next time, when the silence begins to sound familiar? You're listening to Echoes of War.